What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about iRacing's latest car, the Corvette Daytona prototype. Some of the differences between the Riley Daytona prototype that was already available and the Corvette is that the Corvette has significantly more power, about 100 to 150 more horsepower than the old Riley. It also has carbon brakes, so it stops significantly faster. There's a whole heap of downforce more than the Riley ever could have had, as well as the fact that instead of a 5-speed transmission which requires a manual blip on downshift operated by stick or lever, you now have a 6-speed paddle shifted semi-automatic gearbox. Everything's done for you automatically. You also have in-car roll bar adjustments both front and rear, which is something that the Riley Daytona prototype should have had. At least it's on the dashboard, but it never actually got, as well as the fact that you have traction control on the Corvette Daytona prototype, whereas you never did on the Riley. To hopefully better explain why this car drives the way it does, I'd like to do a brief history lesson. Initially, the Grand Am Daytona prototype class was set up to be essentially a low-cost, low-budget competitor to traditional prototype class cars. These cars would be cheaper to build, tube frame construction, simple engines, low technology. The goal would be to get as much car count out there as possible to make really good, exciting racing. Beefy cars that are relatively heavy so they can bump and grind into one another, because remember, Grand Am is essentially NASCAR. Only road racing, but it's the same thing. So that was the idea. It didn't really work. The attendance, the viewership never really got to the levels that it needed to sustain itself, while at the same time here in the United States you also had the American Le Mans series, which used the more European style of class structure that you would see at Le Mans. And that was going downhill as well, and eventually has decided that, hey, we got two series that are doing basically the same thing. We don't have the viewership, we don't have the fan base to support both of them, so let's go ahead and merge together and actually have one series, and everything should hopefully go better. But to do that, you had two top-tier classes from two different series, with the American Le Mans series eventually deciding that the P2 cars were basically going to be the way forward. And then the Grand Am side, you would have the Daytona prototypes representing that side of things. However, there's a significant speed difference between a P2 car and a Daytona prototype, which was significantly slower. Now, to bring that Daytona prototype up to top class speeds, they had to do a lot of things, which is why this car is so weird. They had to add more power than a Daytona prototype was ever eventually conceived to have. They had to add significant levels of downforce, which is why this thing has an absolutely massive rear diffuser and ginormous rear wing, because it really wasn't intended to ever have that. You know, it's just this weird combination of cars where the Corvette Daytona prototype was never really supposed to be what it is, but it has to be what it is because it's now put in this position where it's either that or the class doesn't exist, which fortunately come 2017 this class won't exist and we won't have these cars, but that's a different story for a different time. So basically, the reason this car is so weird is because it's a car that was built with low-tech simplicity in mind from the get-go, and then it was basically adapted to try and race with cars that were significantly faster in the most low-tech, simple way that they possibly could. That's pretty much why it is the oddity that it is. So as you can probably figure out from that little history lesson, the way this car drives is unique. It's not a GT car, it's not a prototype, it's somewhere in between, which I really can't think of anything that actually occupies that area. You know, it's more of a prototype than the older Riley was within iRacing. You know, you have more downforce, more grip, you know, shorter braking distances, more power, but at the same time, because you do have more power, plus the fact that the tires on this car, you know, as the Riley did as well, don't actually have that much grip to them by themselves. You don't have as much mechanical grip as in the P2 car or alternatively the GT1 cars. You know, you're still managing to, you know, roll onto the power coming out of the corner. You're having to manage the power application, which is nice. You know, this is actually a really fun car to drive in that sense, and I do expect it to put on a lot of really good racing because it is, well, somewhere between a P2 car and a GT1 car. It is what it is. It's just this oddball. I will say, however, my enjoyment of this car has been dependent on the circuit that it's being driven at. For example, driving at Mosport, insanely fun, really like it. You know, you go through the corners really fast because you still have significant downforce, but at the same time, you know, the tires just don't have the same level of mechanical grip. And, you know, you can spin out, you can actually balance the car, you can play with it a little bit like you could with the older Riley. And it's actually a heck of a lot of fun. You know, you had to work the car like a GT car through the corners, but at the same time, you're going through them at near prototype speeds, if that makes any sense. However, driving the car at Road Atlanta, for example, was an exercise in frustration. You know, if you are familiar with the original version of the version 5 tire model on the McLaren 12C GT3 within iRacing, it's the same exact friggin' thing. Once again, you know, if you touch a raised curb in this car, you don't know what you're going to get. Half the time you'll be fine, half the time you're just done. And the car will spin out before you can even try and save it, before you can even react. You know, going through the S's at Road Atlanta, exercise in frustration and just patience and hoping to goodness you just survive rather than actually driving the car, because it's so skitterish over any curbing or any bumps that can upset the car, just like that version 5 tire model was on the McLaren. Which, yes, there's going to be ways that we can adapt to that and change that up and work on that setup wise, and we'll adjust to it driving wise. You know, this is coming from somebody who drove that version of the McLaren. You know, you get used to it, you figure it out, and you learn the restraint to not do what you know you need to not do to keep the car on the track, if that makes sense. But it is definitely something that you're going to have to pay attention to, and it is definitely something that is quite annoying because, you know, for example, Turn 5 at Road Atlanta, I can honestly say every single time I was going through there, I was just basically crossing my fingers and hoping to goodness that I'll come out the other side, because I just, quite frankly, don't have a freaking clue what the car's doing at that point. But outside of those situations, on a smoother track, on a track where you don't have to take curbs, you know, or raised curbs, this car's brilliant. It's fun. You know, it is what it is, and that's why it is so much fun. If only it weren't for the fact that this thing handles bumps and curbing like absolute crap. But, yeah, not really shocking. So, yeah. Anyways, closing out the video. First of all, the cockpit camera that you've seen in this video is lowered from its default position. Personally, I found that the default cockpit camera was placed way too high, so I felt like I needed to lower that so I didn't feel like I was driving a school bus. If you don't know how to do that, you can find a video in the description where I will show you how to do that. So that way you can have a more proper seating position. Next up, yes, the car is right-hand drive. This has been the source of supreme amounts of butthurt on the forums. I do not understand it because it should take you about 5 minutes to get used to, especially in a car like this where you sit so close to the center line of the car. This is not the GTR2 TVR where you're sitting on the right door sill popping out of the right-hand window. You basically sit in the middle of the car. It's very easy to adapt to, shouldn't be a factor in whether or not you purchase this car. Seriously. If you're scared away by the fact it's right-hand drive, just go ahead and try it because you won't even notice after 5 laps. And then finally, currently this car uses the sounds from the Riley Pontiac Daytona prototype that was already available within iRacing. Those sounds suck. Those sounds sound absolutely nothing like a Corvette Daytona prototype. Why they use these sounds, I don't know, especially when you consider that even if they didn't have the time to create sounds that were custom for this car, there's still the Cadillac CTS VR, which has sounds that are much closer to those of a Corvette Daytona prototype. So I really don't understand the design decision here, but whatever. Those sounds, though, should be replaced. This is something that we've already heard mentioned. The tentative date for that happening is September 21st, so hopefully we'll receive those updated sounds then. Basically, the story goes that they received some updated sounds at the last moment. However, they were unable to make the original release of this car because the guy responsible for implementing them into the game was away winning a national autocross competition, which is pretty cool. So hopefully we'll receive those updated sounds, and hopefully they'll be much better because they couldn't be much worse. But until then, the sounds on this thing are absolute garbage. But anyways, that's the Corvette Daytona prototype. Hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.
Great job. You did really well.
Matt, hopefully you have some pace to get back to the front. I was looking forward to racing you.
Keep digging.